Come on down front. Yeah. I need it. Yeah. For Brooke.
Thank you.
And for you.
Thank you, sir. Wow. Thank the Lord. Lord, look at this. Woo. That's a biggie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many years ago, we had a choir, and what was her name, the director?
Debbie?
Debbie. Whatever happened to Debbie? She worked also for you in the...
She was secretary.
Yes.
Yeah. And
She had a child, a daughter.
well, what? I've got one. She had a companion, Shelby, and Shelby had the baby. They actually had two. And let's see, in 2005, she left here, and they lived over in Johnson County. So she got a job at a Unitarian church over there in Johnson County by her house.
Well, she wrote music,
Yeah,
and there's some of her music that she wrote.
yeah.
That's where we would get it.
She didn't write any more after all of that.
But not yet.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Okay, well.
I'm bringing my magnifying glass next time.
Didn't bring her. Okay. I'll talk loud.
Huh?
I'll talk loud, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as we begin, everybody's got your papers, right? I'm going to ask you to read stuff as we go along. And I want to tell you a little bit about Tom Harper. Tom Harper is the author of this. And he did not invent these ideas. He learned these ideas. He taught in a religious school. He taught Hebrew and Greek, and he was an Anglican priest. He studied 10 years to become an Anglican priest. And eventually he discovered some of the writing of Alvin Kuhn, which I've talked about before. This is Kuhn's. It weighs a ton. It's one of them, yes. It's one of them. It's very heavy. An interpretation of ancient scriptures. He was a phenomenal, brilliant man. Really a brilliant man. These are his let me tell you one of the issues with reading his stuff is his vocabulary is gigantic. And I have to read it with a dictionary because there's so many words he uses that I never heard of. And he was... Mm-hmm.
He said, oh, that word couldn't possibly
Yeah.
belong.
Yeah. I'd like you to open your paper up to the author's note, which is it's on the third page, left-hand side. The author's note. At the top of author's note, it has a quotation from Alvin Boyd Kuhn, his writing on the rebirth for Christianity. And this is his quotation. Thousands of souls in the pagan world were on fire with the pure flame of divine passion of the Christly love centuries before Jesus ever lived. Centuries before. So there was Christianity before Jesus. He says in the first line, before we begin, there is something you must know about the title of this book. The word pagan is almost totally misunderstood today. The deeply negative sense of the word, entirely the result of centuries of Christian prejudice and bias, is illustrated at once by the concise Oxford Dictionary's almost brusque definition. Quote, heathen, unenlightened, or irreligious person. A pagan. But the citation goes on to admit that in its origin, the word was totally neutral. It comes from the Latin pagus, a country district. A pagan, a paganus, initially was a peasant. The term was soon adopted by emerging church authorities to denote all who were not Orthodox Christians. If they didn't follow the Orthodox line, then they were called pagans, and it was derogatory. Money and power. As we shall see, he goes on, the pagans who were persecuted, decried, killed, and ultimately utterly vanquished by the church, held views of the Christ within. You've heard that before, haven't you? Yeah. They actually believed in that divinity within each one of them. Where did I stop? They held views of the Christ within, that the church was to plagiarize blatantly and then cover up with book burnings, anathemas, and murder. Ironically, centuries later, the church was finally forced to turn to the pagan Aristotle and his teacher Plato to save its theological bacon. The monumental work of St. Thomas Aquinas, which is the foundation of Roman Catholic theology and based upon the writings of Aristotle, including his whole theory of natural law, testifies to that. So, Now you have an idea when you see the title, The Pagan Christ. It's not a negative. It was the Christ within, in every person. Now turn to the discovery. It's got a big 1 at the top of the page. Discovery, a Bible story I've never heard before. The quotation at the top of the page is from John Dominic Crossan, from his writing, Who is Jesus? John Dominic Crossan, I've been familiar with Crossan for a long time. He is a Catholic priest, if he's still living, I'm not sure. But he has been a Catholic priest and a Bible scholar. Yeah, he's good. He's very good. So his quotation, my point once again is not that those ancient people told literal stories and were now smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically and were now dumb enough to take them literally. He understands. He knows how this is. I'm going to let his words tell you about his experiences. If you would like, somebody like to read a bit of this first section that begins with one day in the late 60s. Okay. Go ahead. You want to?
I'll read it a while.
Okay.
One day in the late 60s, while I was teaching at the Toronto School of Theology, Wycliffe College, a very bright English student at Victoria College in the University of Toronto came to my study with an urgent matter to discuss. She was the daughter of a friend of mine and was enrolled in an undergraduate course taught by Northrop Frye, a course which he was justly renowned, probably for which he was justly renowned. Her problem was that her rather conservative evangelical faith was being deeply challenged. The towering scholar, later to become internationally known, in particular for his classic books on the Bible, was telling his class with all his usual wit and verve that the Bible was not a document concerned with history, but a vast collection of sublime myths and metaphors. Though I was far from following any form of fun, I think that's all I'll read. Somebody else.
Fundamentalism.
Somebody else can start with love.
I remember trying to reassure her, not without difficulty, but there was indeed a profoundly historical core to it all. That had been my background, and it suited the college's ethos as well. At that time, I knew very little of Frye's actual thinking apart from her report. 15 years passed before I read the newly published Great Code and then its sequel, Words with Power, and came to a much fuller understanding of what Frye truly had to say and what Bible language really was all about. That experience and his words were in the back of my mind all through the months of research that went into the writing of this book. I found myself in particular recalling Johann L. Aitken's lines in his introduction to Frye's last work, the double vision. Quote, in a legendary undergraduate course, Aitken wrote, Fry reminded his students that when the Bible is historically accurate, it is only accidentally so. Reporting was not of the slightest interest to its writers. They had a story to tell which could only be told by myth and metaphor. What they wrote became a source of vision rather than doctrine. In all my reading ever since, I have found that observation to be wise beyond any view of Scripture I had ever read before. It's an understanding that is vital to this exploration. Somebody want to take the next paragraph?
Let me say that I write here as an homeowner, as a journalist with special training in theology and religion. I have great responsibility in sharing the story that follows with as wide an audience as possible, because what I describe and document in the following pages is one of the most far-reaching tragedies in history. It is the premise of this entire account that very rarely among in the 3rd and 4th centuries BC could be traced in a fatal and fateful error. It is deliberately in a competitive bid to win over the greatest number of the largely unlettered masses, or through willful ignorance of the true inner sense of the profound spiritual wisdom that has inherited from so many ancient sources. The sixth circuit took a literal, popular, historical approach to the sublime truth. What was preserved in the amber of allegory is misrepresented as bottom facts. The transcendent meaning of glorious units and symbols was reduced to a
Farrago. You knew that word, huh? Okay.
of miraculous or irrelevant or quite unbelievable events. The great myth that the Christ was to come in man, that the Christ principle was to enter every one of us, which came to be the foolish teaching that the Christ had come as a man.
Catch the difference there. Christ principle in every one of us. Christ was to come in man, not as man. Continue.
No other could happen or even come close. The dark ages and so much more were individual people.
Yeah. Well, most of what is laid out in this book will probably surprise and stir both faithful and outsider alike. That is not my primary intention. This book is not about seeking controversy or headlines. It is a sincere and earnest search for spiritual truth. Certainly, it is in no way meant as an attack upon Christianity or any other religion, for that matter. Quite the opposite. In fact, in the end, it is about the realization of a richer, more spiritual faith than I ever knew before. I want to affirm with the utmost emphasis and sincerity from the very outset that the evidence investigated here, the discoveries I have made, and the inner struggles and deep insights that have flowed from them have made a joyous and life-changing imprint upon me. When I first began my investigation, I thought to myself, can any of this be true? The implications were enormous. It meant, you see, that much of the thinking of much of the civilized West has been based upon a history that never occurred. And that the Christian church has been founded on a set of miracles that were never performed literally. Finally, though, I said to myself, because of the sheer weight of the evidence before me, yes, I believe it's true. And that has made all the difference. A huge and immensely positive difference for my understanding of my faith and my own spiritual life. Simultaneously, it had transformed my view of the future of Christianity into one of hope. Just to anticipate it a little, here's why I can say that with conviction. You will find that the allegorical, spiritual, mythical approach to the Bible and to Christian faith, that is the true spiritual Christianity, before official Christianism, he uses that term, Christianism, as opposed to Christianity. We should be having Christianity, but the church has been teaching Christianism, took over. Solves the enigmas of Scripture and the Christos story as nothing else can do. Bible stories come alive with amazing new freshness, believability, and power. Our own potential for Christhood and for experiencing the indwelling Spirit of God here and now sounds forth in a clear and relevant message for everyone. Hope for a truly cosmic faith is kindled and fanned into full flame. There's a theological grounding given for our own instinctual yearning for a faith that resonates with our own matter, the material world. Our fresh yet ancient, more universal understanding of the Jesus theme opens up doors to other faiths that Orthodox Christianity as it is now can never hope to pass through. And that's not all. Seen in their new light, the rituals of Easter and Christmas, along with Christian symbols such as the cross and the Eucharist, glow with renewed significance. Somebody take over? Judeo-Christian. Oh, yeah. I said 12:45. During my 10 years? Of course, I had read the great anthropologist Sir James George Fraser's Golden Bough. Oh, that's multiple volumes too. Written between 1890 and 1915, which is, with its comparative religions findings. I had read Plato and Aristotle in Greek at the University of Toronto and again at Oxford, and I had studied both Orphism and the mystery religions. Excuse me. Yet few, if any, of the Egyptian parallels to the gospel writings examined here ever came into my view. The similarities that existed between Christian beliefs and the earlier pagan religions were always quickly passed over in seminary as foreshadowings of the good news proclaimed by the New Testament. Like the various prophecies and prototypes in the Old Testament, similarities in the previous religions were represented as having been wholly fulfilled in Jesus. Nobody even suggested that the opposite might be true, that the Bible in general and the New Testament in particular actually copy or repeat motives laid down many centuries and in some cases many millennia before. I was aware of Sigmund Freud's harsh-sounding dictum that the Bible was a total plagiarism of the Sumerian and Egyptian mythologies. But I had dismissed this as a gross distortion, typical of the founder of modern psychiatry's well-known bias against all religion. I had also once read Dr. Anna Bonus Kingsford's opinion that the Hebrew sacred books were all Egyptian in origin. But I had quite arbitrarily dismissed it as nonsense. When I started my ministry in a parish, and even when I was teaching at the seminary, I had absolutely no idea many of the startling truths you're about to encounter. For example, I didn't fully understand the nature and relevance of what I now call a true myth for early religious thinkers. That myth is more eternal in its meaning than history. It would have been news to me that Moses is an Egyptian name, as in Ramosa or Tutmosa, and even that there was a Jesus in Egypt, Egyptian lore, many thousands of years ago. His name was Yusu, or Yushu or Yusa, according to Gerald Massey. And that means Gerald Massey is one of the people who has done this research back in the 1800s. And that means the coming divine Son who heals or saves. I knew nothing of them. I knew nothing then of an Egyptian Christos, or Christ, named Horus. He and his mother Isis were the forerunners of the Christian Madonna and Child, and together they constituted a leading image in Egyptian religion for millennia prior to the Gospels. Eric Hornung says there was an obvious analogy between the Horus child and the baby Jesus, long before Christianity. Isis had borne the epithet Mother of God, of the God. What a different kind of preaching and teaching I would have done had I realized that this mythical Horus anticipated by thousands of years most of the sayings and the miracles of Jesus Christ. That he too had a supernatural birth, and that in one of his roles he was a fisher of men with 12 followers. It would have made a profound difference to me to know that piercing the literal sense of the Bible to reveal its hidden allegorical and mystical inner core could free us up and offer new, transformative spiritual vistas and insights. For example, imagine my surprise at discovering during the research for this book that Martha and Mary figure in a story about the raising from the dead of Al-Azar, or Lazarus, at an Egyptian Bethany about 4,000 years ago. The miracle described in John's Gospel was never a historic event. Instead, it was a recurring, deeply archetypal and widely used symbol of God's power to resurrect the dead. There is so much more to explore and share. Most potent of all has been the increasing knowledge I have gained of how the key early Christian doctrine, the incarnation of spirit in human flesh or matter in each of us, is in fact the oldest, most universal mythos known to religion. It was current in the Osirian religion in Egypt at least 2,000 years BCE. But I anticipate. In any event, I can promise the reader this. I have indeed found for myself, in the course of all the emotional and intellectual wrestlings involved in coming to grips with this material, not just a deeper faith, but a far more bracing, more intellectually honest, more tuned into the universe itself kind of belief system than I ever dreamed possible. I see my Christian faith with a transformed vision. What I have written is not intended primarily for scholars, although I hope they will be deeply challenged and learn from it too. While I have the greatest respect for scholarship and will be drawing upon the work of experts in many fields, as well as my own training and experience, I have dedicated my entire professional career as a theologian and journalist to the attempt to make complex issues as simple as possible for ordinary, intelligent lay people. The scholars have their libraries and their own hidden sources. Many of them, it seems, can communicate only with one another. Indeed, some of them may like it that way. But the result too often has been, and still is, that ordinary, traditional citizens, the majority of any society, have been ignored or left to pick up whatever crumbs drop from the academic table. This is never more true than related to matters of theology, to religious beliefs and doctrines. Somebody take over? Yeah. Ordinary, yeah. The church today stands at a crossroads. Many of its best thinkers are warning that it may have only one more generation before extinction because of its failure to communicate meaningfully with the postmodern age. Well, we've noticed churches are kind of shrinking, dwindling. Richard Holloway, former primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church, rightly notes that the religio-spiritual longing of modern men and women has never been stronger. But he says, quote, "The end of Christianity is coming because there is a system undergirding the traditional economy of salvation, which is more concerned with preserving its own power than exploring the truth." My own thinking and experience confirm this. The answer to this crisis lies in a proper understanding of where and how everything began. However, engaging in this endeavor reveals some extremely disturbing facts. The blunt truth is that seismic research by a few specifically neutral scholars, most notably Orientalists and Egyptologists, has been deliberately ignored by churchly authorities for many decades. Scholars such as Godfrey Higgins, 1771 to 1834, author of the monumental tome Anacalypsis, the British Egyptologist Gerald Massey, 1824 to 1908, and more recently and most important, the already cited American specialist in ancient sacred literature, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, 1881 to 1963, have made it clear in voluminous, eminently learned works that the Jewish and Christian religions do indeed owe most of their origins to Egyptian roots. Certainly a full appreciation of the huge contribution such experts as Higgins, Massey, and especially Kuhn have made to finding a fresh understanding of religion in general and Christianity in particular is long overdue. These men and their scholarship challenge present Christianity to the core and yet, without question, offer a radically fresh and hope-filled way ahead. They were men far in advance of their time. Through it all, though, they believed firmly in the presence of a divine power or cosmic mind behind and throughout the universe, and in the survival of the soul after death. I personally owe them a lot more than I can ever say. Godfrey Higgins will always have a firm place in comparative religions studies because of his massive 2-volume Anacalypsis, an inquiry into the origins of languages, nations, and religions. It was to have a profoundly formative influence upon Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Many years later, it stands as one of the most learned and far-ranging studies of the origins of religion I have ever encountered. First published in only 200 copies in 1833, it was the final product of many long years of study. Gerald Massey was a man of vivid genius and poetic fire who distinguished himself as a social reformer, a poet, and especially an Egyptologist. His poetry won the admiration of both Tennyson and Ruskin. His fame, however, rests mainly on 6 monumental volumes that dealt in length with the mythology and religion of ancient Egypt. He studied the extensive Egyptian records housed in the British Museum and taught himself to decipher the hieroglyphics. Although he was a capable lecturer, his speeches and books were not widely circulated. The record shows that his controversial work was considered taboo in what was regarded in his day as respectable literary and religious circles. He was nevertheless light years ahead of his time. I found the writings and research of Dr. Alvin Boyd Kuhn to be the most erudite, most eloquent, and most convincing, both intellectually and intuitively, of any modern writer on religion I have encountered in a lifetime dedicated to such matters. To meet him through his books and monographs is to be confronted by a towering polymath whom history has yet to recognize fully in all his brilliance. Kuhn's second book, The Lost Light, that's the heavy little one that I lifted up. It's heavy. It was published in 1940, was a stunning, exhaustive exposition of the allegories, parables, and personages of biblical Christianity and of the basic foundations of all religion. It is unquestionably his single greatest contribution to a rational, convincing, highly illuminating understanding of what the ancient wisdom was really all about and where religion, especially Christianity, should be going today. I have a signed first edition of this book on my desk as I write this. Printed on the title page are the words, "This book will be to religion what Darwin's work has been to science." A quotation from the president of the National Library Board of America. I think that's a pretty good bit of praise for it. Kuhn's books have never been given the wide recognition they so deeply deserved. He simply stepped too often and much too hard on too many powerful toes, particularly those of the vested religious institutions and their hierarchical keepers. Far from being an original contribution to the world of religious thought, as these scholars have convincingly shown, Christianity was turned in the early centuries into a literalist copy of a resplendent spiritual forerunner. I will clearly document that there is nothing that Jesus of the Gospels either said or did, from the Sermon on the Mount to the miracles, from his flight as an infant from Herod to the resurrection itself, that cannot be shown to have originated thousands of years before in Egyptian mystery rites and other sacred liturgies, such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Everything, from the star in the east to Jesus walking on water, from the angel's pronouncement to the slaughter of the innocents by Herod, from the temptations in the wilderness to the changing of water into wine, already existed in the Egyptian sources. Egypt and its peoples had knelt at the shrine of the Madonna and child Isis and Horus for many long centuries before any allegedly historical Mary lifted a supposedly historical Jesus in her arms. But for all those centuries before the translation of the Rosetta Stone by Champollion in 1822, the ancient key to all this Egyptian material had been lost. Centuries of blissful ignorance went by. Now, since the translation of the books of Old Egypt, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Pyramid texts, the Anduat, and the Book of Thoth, for example, there is irrefutable proof that not one single doctrine, rite, tenet, or usage in Christianity was in reality a fresh contribution to the world of religion. Kuhn puts it tersely when he says that the entire body of Christian doctrine is simply a revamped and mutilated Egyptianism. These may seem extremely blunt words, but a full reading of his works reveals the mountain of undeniable evidence he has to back them up. The cross, as we shall see, was a feature of ancient religion for the vast span of time prior to the Christian era. But imagine my surprise when I discovered that something universally believed to have been a purely Christian innovation, the Greek monogram comprising the first two letters of the word for Christ, Chi and Rho. You familiar with that? Letters often superimposed on each other in church ornamentation was also pre-existent to Christianity. It appears on the coins of the Ptolemies and even those of King Herod the Great, almost 40 years BCE. Herod was making king of the Jews by the Romans in 40 BCE, and he reigned until 4 BCE. The Emperor Constantine the Great put his monogram on the labarum, or standard of his legions, after his famous victory at the Milvian Bridge 300 years later. Thus he linked the church to his political and military power, and all who rebelled against the new Catholic or universal orthodoxy were labeled heretics. In his introduction to Who is this King of Glory, one of his deliberately neglected and yet most learned exposés, Kuhn says that the entire Christian Bible, creation legend, the descent into the Exodus from Egypt, ark and flood allegory, Israelite history, Hebrew prophecy and poetry, and the imagery of the Gospels, the epistles, and the Revelation are now proven to have been transmitted from ancient Egypt's scrolls and papyri into the hands of later generations who didn't know their true origin or their fathomless meanings. He asserts that, quote, long after Egypt's voice, expressed through the inscribed hieroglyphics, was hushed in silence, the perpetuated relics of Hamitic or Egyptian wisdom, with their cryptic message utterly lost, were brought forth to the world by parties of ignorant zealots as a new body of truth. End quote. Only by fully acknowledging and regaining its parenthood in the sublime pagan source will Christianity rise at last to its intended true nobility and splendor, he argues. Somebody take over? That's a great image. Yeah. Yeah, that would be the Jesus figure, the Galilean paragon. I have labored to present this work as clearly as possible, yet in places some hard work will be required, and readers must be prepared to think on their own and to be open to fresh ideas. It might well be a good idea to keep a Bible at hand in case you want to check a reference for yourself, but this isn't essential. Keep in mind throughout that However negative, even shocking the evidence may seem at times, a vast hope shines through it all. The overwhelmingly positive conclusions finally point toward an exhilarating new approach to faith and to a sorely needed, truly spiritual Christianity in this still very new millennium. My goal throughout is not to summarily dismiss the deep beliefs held by many millions in North America, Europe, and increasingly now in the Southern Hemisphere, where the vast majority of today's Christians live. But I do want these people to think deeply about their faith anew. Once the surgery is over, you will see with me how the Bible is wonderfully illumined afresh, how a rational cosmic faith not only is possible, but indeed is the only thing that makes sense in our fast-changing, pluralistic world. You will learn how any future faith must and can be fully grounded in nature and its cycles. The Jesus story will come alive and strike your heart and intellect as never before. Traditional rituals such as Holy Communion, baptism, and the church's key festival of Christmas and Easter will have new power once we understand their true meaning in the light of the ancient wisdom. The near universal belief in a glorious destiny beyond the grave will be grounded once and for all in something more solid than a merely pious or emotion-based faith. Belief in the Christ within will be established as the key to personal and communal transformation. And our journey begins. Imagine a Baptist church across town hearing this. This would be shocking. Yeah. And we are fortunate. Yeah, we're fortunate because we still do metaphysical Bible interpretation. And the others don't. So they read it as history, and it's all literal. Yeah. And Charles Fillmore, New Thought itself, developed the metaphysical interpretation because they realized that these Bible stories have deep wisdom in them. And if you don't look beyond the surface, you don't get it. You don't. It's just like I can't think of the word. Learning to behave better. You know, to be better a little bit on the outside rather than it becoming something that is visceral and changes and transforms you on the inside. And he sang, Jesus, help! He said with a slightly southern accent. Yeah. Section 2, and that's the one with the setting the stage. Let's just look a little bit at the first page because you're going to have this to take home with you. Myths are not fairy tales. But we've learned that's been what the world has said, you know. A myth is a false story. Maybe a nice story, but it's not real. But they are. This is from Alvin Boyd Kuhn from his Who is the King of Glory? On the intellectual side of religion and spirituality, We're still dwelling in the lingering shadows of medieval night, hypnotized and victimized by superstition of the weirdest types, flaunted from pulpit and seminary. Oh, bless his heart. This beclouded day of gloom will continue as long as we have not the acumen to dissociate sublime myth, allegory, drama, and symbol from the dregs of history. That's a powerful statement. It really is. Bhagavad Gita. Those who lack discrimination may quote the letter of the scripture, but they are really denying its inner truth. The discoveries and revelations in this book have had a profound effect upon my own personal spiritual journey. Do you get a sense of Tom Harper from the way he writes? I see him as a really great man. When I found out, and I found out because I was looking for other books of his, and I came up with his obituary. And I got so sad because he's coming to find these books and to find not only him but the other people. This has put a fire in me and a recharging of life. And I want to know the truth. That's what we're supposed to be about in New Thought. Is working with truth. And we've got an awful lot of religion that isn't truth. So much superstition and just plain old wrongness. A profound effect. It's hard for me even now to believe that throughout all my previous training in and inquiry into the spiritual and religious dimensions of life, I could have missed something so important. Indeed, the uncovering of these truths has been unquestionably the most transformative experience of my life. My hope is that my excitement and inspiration will be passed on to you. And then he says, we begin by taking a closer look at myth. I don't want to hold you up anymore, but we can take off with the power of myth next week, and you can read ahead all you want. And I will be giving you another section of this. I didn't tell you specifically. I was going to buy books for you. And I went on.
Bring my magnifying glass so I can see.
I went on Amazon, and they didn't have any. And the only thing I could find were used books. And when you buy a used book online, you don't know what its condition is until it's in your hands.
Yeah.
And I would have to buy one from this seller and one from that seller and one from another seller. And so I copied it. Ah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. This all comes from someplace else. It's not Rome. It's not any particular denomination. It's all borrowed. Doesn't make it not true. But we need to know the truth in order to live by the truth. In order to, you've heard that expression, God is to you whatever you believe it is. Have you heard that? Well, think about it. If you don't think that the Christ in you is the most important thing in your life, then it won't be. And if you're thinking about something out there, Jesus out there, and you're praying to something out there, you're missing the divinity that's right here with you. We were all created as expressions of the Christ, which is not Jesus, but expressions of God. I've talked about when we were created, God put a spark of itself in each one of us. That's not a piece of Jesus. That's a piece of God that's in each one of us. And that's what should become important to us. Jesus is a wonderful figure in the Bible and in the stories as a representation of what Christ in you is capable of doing. The things that Jesus said, follow me. And that meant we can do the things he did because we have the same thing within us. That same divinity. And it's important that we develop it, develop our awareness of it, so we work in conjunction with it. I get all excited. Anyway. Yeah. We'll do it again next week? Okay. I hope you enjoy reading this. I couldn't really come up with a better way than using Tom's words, because he's the guy that's trying to tell you, and he's the guy who knows all about this. And I still am sad that he's not with us. I'd love to meet him. You know, I thought about that before I knew he had made his transition. How dare you? I think he was. Yes. Yep. Yeah, Walter Lanyon is a wonder. Yep. Yep. All righty. Well, we'll do it again. Could you hear anything?
Yes, I heard.
Could you hear anything? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Really, really great.
I will copy just a page of one of these so you can get an idea of some of the vocabulary of Kuhn. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember when I first started reading this some weeks ago. And I don't know what that word is. I never saw that word before. Oh, yeah. He just pulled them out of his nose.
A logistics question.
Uh-huh.
Would you like me to use Marquet's accompaniments this month so that we don't be practicing after this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah, so
easier.
I'll be thinking on the 30th, and then we can decide what to do from there. How long are you going to carry this class on, you know?
No, I think it's going to be just depend on how interested folks stay. And I mean, if I give them all the book, and then if they decide that they're tired of doing it, here they can read it at home.
I discovered that when I held a never-ending class,
Yeah,
that it would dwindle after a
yeah.
while. So I started cutting it off at a certain place and restarting with someone else.
We're in the second
Yeah.
chapter.
You're going to have to think of something else to talk about and send money.
I know.
And when you're talking about Jesus on ice, I thought, that guy who decided Jesus walked on ice doesn't realize that you need 12 inches of ice for it to be safe for anybody
Yeah,
to walk on.
exactly.
And since all these waves were scaring Peter, I don't think you might be able to do that on Lake Michigan.
Yeah, yeah. It
Even the waves freeze.
in the deep cold, when it's truly frozen hard. Yeah. Yeah, well, those ice fishermen, good Lord. They go out there on that lake and catch fish. They have special vehicles that are kind of antique. I guess they're not really made anymore, but they were made for ice fishing. I don't remember what they're called. They're very yeah. Hi, Midnight.
Where have you guys been?
Yeah.
Where have you guys been?
Oh, I love that guy.
Goodness sakes, yeah.
I love him so much. I still keep telling him, you make all the difference. He makes me laugh. He makes me feel loved. Do you need this?
No, it's in my computer. I'll print another one.
Okay. I pulled the bulletin out from last week, and apparently it's correct.
This is?
Well, yeah, but last week's...
The only one that was wrong was that first one. That was from last month.
Our first one, what?
The affirmation. The one you didn't know, you said he gave you the wrong one. That one that was up there was last month. But the rest of them were right.
Well, I read it off of the bulletin because I didn't know what was wrong.
Right. The one behind
I want you to read this. You'll love it. Oops. Oh.
From the beginning, you mean?
Yeah. Well,
It's gonna take me 8 years.
here. You can skip this person who put it on the internet